Hi, thank you very much for having me here today. My name's Michala Liavaag, and I'm a cybersecurity lead. So I was really fortunate in that I went to a girls' grammar school where I had two computer teachers who did a job share, and they were both women. And we actually had boys come over from the boys' grammar school. So it never ever occurred to me that computing wasn't something that girls could do. Even and this was back in like the late 80s, early 90s. So I think I was really lucky at that point. And it was only recently that I realised, looking back, that that was unusual. But at school, I was always interested in computers and music. And as it happens, I actually went down the music route. So my degree's in classical music. And then when I left uni, I opened a computer game shop, as you do. There were really fun times with the computer game shop, hanging out with the kids and everything. But unfortunately, somebody decided it wasn't such a great place and burnt it down. And so rather than reopening, I actually moved down south in the UK with my partner at the time. And I ended up trying to be a housewife and worked at Gatwick Airport. I managed 3 internet units. Do you remember the days of internet cafes when people didn't have internet at home? So I managed 3 units there. And then I left there, and eventually, after some temping work, I got an opportunity to work in local government. And I joined their help desk IT team, and really the rest from there is sort of history. And sort of progressed. Did my time through the ranks. Desktop support, telephony support, moved into project management. Then eventually, I worked for a partnership of councils because the emphasis was very much on, what can we do. Much more work for less money, is that whole time of austerity. And after that, I unfortunately got ill and took a year out for treatment. And on my return, I was looking for a new challenge. And it was quite funny, really. The partnership manager, he said to me, "Oh, there's this wonderful new role we've got. It's about data classification. So would you be interested in that?" No. It sounded really boring. It's like, no, thank you. And then the following week, his boss came and took me to lunch and basically did this amazing sales job on me and explained that it was a new role. They were looking at, the importance of information, how people use it, how we can secure it. And he just the way he sold it convinced me actually this would be a really interesting thing to have a go at doing. So at that point, I didn't really have any experience. He was taking a risk on me, and I was, having a risk as well. But I dove into the topic, self-studied lots and lots, and yeah, the rest is history, really. I think there's a huge link probably between computer gamers and the industry. Most people probably think about it from the point of view of, you'll have been playing, looking for ways around how to cheat the game and maybe get into hacking through that avenue. My avenue was actually not that one. With gaming, I have very fond memories of playing things like Civilization. And back in those days, the early game, you couldn't do all the things you wanted to say, like manage your money in your towns and things, actually in the game, in the interface. So I developed a wonderful Excel spreadsheet and learned lots about how to use Excel to achieve what I wanted in game. So that was one thing. Obviously, there's a huge range of types of games, and I'm not what I'd class as a hardcore gamer who like goes for maximum XP and all that sort of stuff. I'm quite relaxed about it. But for, like, say, real-time strategy games, it really highlights your sort of analytical and tactical skills and the way you think. The sort of role-playing and puzzle type games really call out that attention to detail and that puzzle solving, the problem solving, which is really helpful. And then when you play, as time went on, you got to play games online, so with other people, which has been absolutely wonderful. And I actually met my husband through online gaming, actually. And you're like, say, going on raids and things like that. And that's basically when you like go on an adventure with a common objective. You learn to develop those teamwork skills because everyone's got different specialities with their characters, and you've got to learn to work together to achieve what you want to. So developing teamwork and leadership skills is also something that comes out of gaming, I'd say. You've got the guilds again, so that leadership development, managing conflicts. We've played, cities and managing cities and all sorts of things. Managing events, if you're into the role-playing side of gaming, creating events and storylines for other players, again, is a huge part of it. So there's lots of different ways that gaming is really, really useful for giving you skills, not just in cybersecurity, to be fair, in business in general. One of the other wonderful things about gamers in particular is the attitude around not giving up. That there's this sort of really strong sort of tenacity around problem solving, and that tenacity and curiosity is something that's so important in cybersecurity. So for that reason, I do actually think that gamers make really good cybersecurity professionals, or can do with that trait. Right from the start of working in it, and it's still true today, some, I don't know, 10 odd years later, is that people don't realise the value of their information, and they don't really think about who they give it to and how those people might be handling it. And I still find that quite, I wouldn't say shocking, but it's definitely interesting to me, the different attitudes people have to that. People generally trust, they generally think people will do the right thing by me and my information. And I think if people saw how some companies actually treat their information, they'd actually be quite disappointed and shocked and wouldn't be so keen to give it out. It was a really wonderfully varied role, and it did actually change quite a bit over the years, because I was there for 4 years as our security matured. There wasn't really an average working day, but I would say over a week, I'd be involved in the same sort of activity. And primarily, I'm what we class as a sort of GRC professional. So that's the governance, risk and compliance side of security, rather than being hands-on, doing the hunting and the logs and that sort of stuff. I've done a bit of that, but not anymore. And because of doing that type of role, you really get involved in everything across the whole place, which is really, really great. And it means that it's always interesting and different. You never get bored. So a typical week would be, I'd spend quite a bit of time managing and developing staff, reporting on risks that were going to be outside what was the agreed tolerance level for the organisation, reporting that up to the execs. Also doing risk assessments, so looking at new services that are coming in, new procurements, new suppliers, looking at what could go wrong with those, but also then weighing up the benefits, of that. I would spend time effectively acting as a sort of internal consultant towards different departments across the organisation and providing that specialist advice. And again, they would then weigh that up against what they were trying to do. It was actually, as a charity, quite a heavily regulated organisation. We had to comply with the Gambling Commission Remote Technical Security Standard because we sold lottery tickets raffle online. As a healthcare charity, there's the NHS Data Security Protection Toolkit that we had to comply with. Obviously, personal data, so GDPR. Then you've obviously got the network information regulations as well. And there was, I'm missing one, PCI DSS, because of the retail online as well as in stores, not with lockdown, obviously. The whole regulatory side meant that I had to have a quite strong compliance part to the strategy. What else was I doing? Scoping pen tests and external consultancy engagements, instant investigations, issues, education and awareness. Some of my favourite times actually were, doing that education awareness with people and watching that penny drop with people, and then changing their behaviour and then starting to raise issues and thinking about things. That was some of the most rewarding things, I'd say, actually, in my time there. The main lesson for me, and I'd say others in the field, please do learn from me on this, is look after your health. And that of your team. As somebody said to me recently, no job is worth it, no matter how great the cause. And unfortunately, in my case, I am a cautionary tale because I did completely burn out. It was in Octoberish. I unfortunately went off sick, and then I left in the November, and I've been taking some time out for myself since then to recover. It's been very, intense 4 years, and I did basically a workaholic, just working all the time, trying to get things done. Because again, as a charity, you don't have the funds that some of the private sector firms do to achieve what you want in a strategy and what needs to happen. And so I tended to put it all on myself and do that. And you can't do that. It's not healthy at all. So that would be my main lesson going forward. And cybersecurity in general, I'd say it varies a little bit by role, but generally speaking, a lot of the roles are very intense. It's an intense field, changes all the time. You need to learn a lot to stay up to date. It's really important to do that. And so it's very easy for it to become the thing that you just leave, breathe, sleep, and forget this little thing called life outside it. So that would definitely be my main thing. I've been very encouraged the past year, certainly since, I'm trying to think when it started. The last year, I've seen on Twitter more people being open about burnout, mental health. It was July last year, the Chartered Institute for Information Security published their workforce study. And in that, I remember being absolutely shocked that I think it was 79% of professionals had either burned out and left a job, were stressed and thinking about leaving a job, or knew somebody that had. So when you think that's only 21% who are sort of happily managing, that's not a great thing for the industry. So we do need to sort of come together, support one another, and find better ways of being and managing, in this industry. People do think about, with the blue light responders, the mental toll for them. But during this COVID period and lockdown, I think cybersecurity responders have been very much forgotten. And yeah, I definitely found, in terms of my experience, that there's been a difference between the local authorities, that's public sector, NHS and charity sector. So if I just maybe give you a couple of examples. In both the local authority and the NHS, the people we serve are effectively a captive audience. If you're not happy with your bin collections, or there's a data breach of, say, the garden bin list or something, you're not going to go to the neighbouring local authority and say, I'm not dealing with them anymore, I want you to collect my bins. You are that captive audience. And it's very similar with the NHS as well, because whilst I know they make a great big thing about NHS choices, etc., unless you pay for private medical care, most people will have care from whoever the resident in the area of that trust. And so again, it's a captive audience. If there's a data breach, yes, there'll be perhaps some negative press, but people aren't really going to go anywhere else. They're still going to come to you for that care, generally speaking. What I found particularly different about the charity sector was that everything is about the brand and the trust in that brand, because without that trust, you don't get the income and the fundraising from people. And that's just so vital, obviously, to be able to provide whatever services you do. And so I actually found them to be more risk averse and therefore more willing to invest in cybersecurity than local authorities and the NHS, which I found quite surprising, actually, when I first went there. It made sense when I understood why, but initially I was kind of like, this doesn't make sense. They're a charity, surely it should be the other way around. But that's the reason why. It's all about that trust. And if you do have a negative breach that hits the press and you lose that income, you obviously can't, do what you need to in terms of serving whoever it is that needs your services. In each of these cases, they were all heavily regulated, and one of the things, again, that I found surprising about moving to a healthcare charity was that we now had that combination of the healthcare regulation side with the payment side and the additional lottery raffle side, as well as the personal data side. So it's like all coming together. And again, I think people don't really think about charities as being subject to regulation in the way they might perhaps think of, say, a bank or something. So there are definitely some differences. The other thing I'd perhaps call out that I found quite sobering was when I worked at the NHS, it was a mental health trust. And so when we were thinking about rolling out Skype for Business and having patient consultations, the sorts of conversations we were having when we were developing the policy for that were things around self-harm. If somebody did something and the practitioner's obviously miles away from them on the other end of the screen, what can they do? And so there were other considerations literally to do with physical harm that I hadn't had to deal with prior in my career. So I think each organization has their own particular thing, but those would be my main learnings about the differences between those three industries. I wouldn't say just in the charity sector, I think for everybody actually. Anyone who wasn't already on that road with digital transformation will either have sort of gotten headlong into it and redefined their strategy and forging ahead, or unfortunately, obviously, some companies haven't survived, and we've seen lots of them fall by the wayside because they haven't done that. In terms of cybersecurity, it's a very funny thing that the pandemic, in one way, has been a really good thing for speeding up some of the investment in things like remote working and making sure you secure things at the data level rather than at the perimeter. So if you look at things around sort of zero trust principles, that's really the heart of the strategies now. I think people were slowly moving towards that, but this has really sped that up. So from that point of view, it's actually been really positive. And obviously with the lockdown, lots of companies not operating for a period, that's meant that the downtime's been there to take advantage of, to make some of the changes that perhaps you couldn't do when people were operating 24/7. So in that way, it's actually been quite positive. That said, it's also been field day for cyber criminals. You do have that weak point in people's homes for the people who are working at home. They've had to become effectively their own little cybersecurity team with themselves and their family if they live with people. And that is a bit of a nightmare, for any organization that doesn't have what it needs in place to protect themselves. So it's, I think, been a blessing and a curse, a bit of a mixed one. But I do hope out of it, everyone does become a little bit more cyber aware and take responsibility, for their own cybersecurity at home. I think everyone does have that responsibility. The first thing, be honest with yourself. Are you going to be prepared to work hard and commit to lifelong learning? Because as I've already mentioned, it's always changing and you do need to stay up to date. If you don't like doing that, this career is not for you. So that's the first thing. Next thing is read Jessica Barker's excellent book, which is called Confident Cybersecurity, How to Get Started in Cybersecurity and Future-Proof Your Career. I've actually written a review on Goodreads about why I recommend that book. It is really well done, and I think a great introduction to somebody thinking about this career. Explains a bit of the history, some of the key concepts, why it's important, the different industries, different types of roles. Really, really good grounding, so I strongly recommend that. The next thing I'd say is learn about the different types of job roles, because whilst cybersecurity, most people will think it's quite a niche area, in some ways it is. Once you learn more about it, you realise just how broad it is and how many different careers and paths there are through it, which again, I'm maybe slightly biased. I think it makes it one of the most exciting areas to work in. It's absolutely brilliant that there is so much variety and something for everybody. So take that time to find out and look at your own strengths and weaknesses and what excites you, and then align yourself to the roles that would suit you for that. That would be one of my key things. I'd also say find a mentor. There's lots of people who are willing to share their experiences and help guide and support you in your career journey. So do that, and there's different ways of doing that. There's the professional associations have their formal schemes, or on Twitter, I think it's She Hacks Pancakes, I think, has like the Cyber Mentoring Mondays. So you can look at the hashtag and just chat out with people, and people will support. And then my final thing, and I've already said it earlier, is about being curious and seeking out knowledge. I have to say, sometimes I'm a little bit jealous actually about this generation's opportunities when it comes to cybersecurity, because when I was growing up, if you wanted to learn stuff, you basically had your teachers, your parents, or you went to the library. Nowadays, you've got this amazing thing called the internet and YouTube, and there's just so much knowledge out there for the taking because people are just willing to share. So just absorb it all, but focus as well. Figure out what excites you and focusing on that area, because it is such a broad area. You can find yourself going down all sorts of avenues. So I would say focus. That's the additional bonus point. Yes, as I just mentioned, all the information's out there for the taking nowadays. So if I just sort of go through some areas, so I'd start off with social media. Twitter, whilst some people will find, yes, there are the haters and some negative things out there, and I would just give a little word of caution to any women in information security on Twitter, that there are some, unfortunately, men who don't behave, give the area a bad name. Just block them, ignore them, and follow the people who are decent. There's lots of supportive people out there, lots of great people. So just be picky about who you follow. But I would say that in terms of keeping myself up to date with the industry and learning new things, Twitter is actually probably the #1 resource that I use day in, day out. I also use Reddit as well quite a bit, and there's the NetSec, Ask NetSec, and cybersecurity Reddits are quite good, so I'd recommend those. There are others, but I'd pick those two out. I would say in terms of learning about general best practices and good practice, a good starting point is the National Cybersecurity Centre website. There's a huge wealth of materials on there, and I'd really recommend going through those, again, depending on what area you want to focus on. In terms of books, I've already mentioned Jessica Barker's book, but I'd also add to that there's a series called Tribe of Hackers, and the first one was kind of a compilation from different hackers across the world, and they call it hackers, but it wasn't just hackers, about different advice for people in cybersecurity. And then they've had follow-ups to that. So one's red team, one's blue team, and the one's around leadership. So again, once you've narrowed down about the roles, I'd recommend having a read of some of those, whichever one suits you. Another huge resource that, and I'd say I used this far more before the COVID-19 lockdown than now, unfortunately, and that's just because I had a nice long commute to work in London, which meant I could get to listen to podcasts quite a lot, whereas now I don't listen to them as much. But podcasts after Twitter are probably, again, that wonderful resource of up-to-date knowledge and conversation and getting different views from people. So the daily one I recommend is the Internet Storm Centre cast, the Stormcast. It's only like 5 minutes, and you get this wonderful roundup very quickly of what's going on in the world. So brilliant, really recommend that. My favourite weekly ones are Risky Business with Patrick Gray. And when I was starting out especially, I would have recommended the Security Now with that's Steve Gibson and Leo Laporte. I don't listen to it so much now because it's like about 2 hours at a time. There's so much content in it. But when you're starting out especially, there's so much good stuff in that. I learned a lot from that, so I'd really recommend that. For leadership, I really like Down the Security Rabbit Hole. That's really fun. Some great insights coming from that one. Maybe just a shout out to Unsupervised Learning as well, who takes the time to really sort of pull together all those resources each week for you. So if you just want to listen to one cast, then that's a good place to start. Then of course there's all the e-learning that's available. If you're in a Microsoft house, then the Microsoft Learn, they've got lots of free stuff available, which is really good quality content, and you can try all their stuff so you can get some hands-on experience. So I recommend that. I personally subscribe to some paid services, IT Pro TV and the Cybery, and also actually LinkedIn Learning as well. So Cyber used to be free, but now it's a paid service, but they are really good as well. But I have to say, I do really like the approach of IT Pro TV because they call it edutainment. You've got a presenter and they sort of have a bit of a chat. It's a bit more informal than boring presentations. Obviously YouTube, lots of stuff on YouTube. And I've already mentioned about networking with professional associations, the webinars and different groups. And obviously, unfortunately, with pandemic lockdown, it's not quite the same, as going out and meeting people, but there is still that.